Dracula by Bram Stoker, published in 1897. A Lantern Library retelling. My name is Jonathan Harker. I am by trade a solicitor, and in the year 1875 I was sent on business to a far-off land. My task was simple, or so I believed. A foreign nobleman, a certain Count Dracula of Transylvania, had purchased a property in England, and it was my duty to travel to him, deliver the papers, and settle the matter. I left London full of eagerness, as though on an adventure, but I did not yet know what awaited me. The further east I traveled, the stranger the world became. I crossed Germany into the wild hills of Hungary, where the air was sharp and the people suspicious of strangers. As the train crept toward Transylvania, I could see the dark Carpathian mountains rising like jagged teeth. Their forests seemed endless, their valleys deep and silent, as if the land itself had fallen under some old enchantment. At every stop, the locals warned me not to go on. "You're going to the Count?" they whispered, their eyes wide with fear. Old women pressed crucifixes into my hand and begged me to turn back. When I tried to laugh it off, their faces only grew paler, as though I had mocked a terror they knew all too well. On the eve of St. George's Day, they said, when the clock strikes midnight, the powers of darkness are strongest. And it was on that very night I was to arrive at Castle Dracula. I pressed on regardless. A carriage carried me to the inn at Borgo Pass, where I was told the Count's own driver would fetch me. As the sun fell, a cold dread took root in my chest, and then, through the rolling mist, I heard the rattle of wheels. A black carriage appeared, drawn by 4 horses whose eyes gleamed red in the torchlight. The driver was tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden deep in a cloak. Without a word, he motioned me inside. The horses sprang forward at a terrifying speed, and soon we were plunging into the mountain pass. The road twisted higher and higher. Wolves howled in the forests all around us, their cries rising in a dreadful chorus. The horses did not falter. The driver urged them on with a strength no ordinary man could possess. At times I thought we would go over the cliff edge, but somehow the carriage kept its course, until at last, rising out of the mist, I saw it. Castle Dracula. A vast fortress clinging to the rock, its towers stabbing at the moonlit sky. It seemed less like a home than a prison, ancient and brooding, its windows dark and lifeless. The driver swept me through the gates and vanished into the shadows. And there, waiting on the great stone steps, was my host. Count Dracula. He was tall and thin, his skin pale, his eyes burning with a strange inner light. His face was strong, his nose sharp, his mouth cruel, though he smiled with an air of courtesy. His grip, when he took my hand, was ice cold, and his strength startling. "Welcome to my house, Mr. Harker," he said in a deep voice, his accent heavy and foreign. "Enter freely, and of your own will." I stepped across the threshold, and the great doors slammed shut behind me. At first, the Count treated me with every form of politeness. He served me supper, though he himself never touched food or drink. By day, he vanished from sight, leaving me alone to wander the castle's vast and silent halls. By night he returned, speaking endlessly of England, its towns, its customs, its language. He asked strange, minute questions, as though preparing to live there himself. But there was something unnatural about him. He cast no reflection in the mirror. His breath was rank with decay. His hands, when they brushed mine, were as cold as stone, and there were no servants. The Count alone prepared the meals, cleared the dishes, tended to the fires. It was as if the entire castle belonged to him and him alone. Soon I discovered I was not a guest, but a prisoner. The doors were locked, the windows barred, the walls sheer drops to the cliffs below. No messenger came, no carriage left the gates. I was trapped in that fortress of silence. One evening, as I pleaded for my release, the Count leaned close, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You are mine now, Mr. Harker," he murmured, his voice like silk over steel. "England awaits me, and you shall pave my way. Resist, and your fate will be eternal." His words sent a shiver through me, revealing the depth of his cunning cruelty. Then one night, from my window, I saw him. The Count emerged from a window high above and began to creep down the wall of the castle, head first, like a lizard. His cloak spread out around him, his fingers and toes clutching the stones as though gravity held no sway over him. My blood froze at the sight. I dared not believe it, yet night after night he left in the same manner, slithering down the walls and vanishing into the forest. And still worse awaited me. One evening, disobeying his warning never to stray, I opened a forbidden door and found myself in a chamber hung with velvet, dimly lit by moonlight. There, on a couch, lay 3 women. Their faces were pale, but their beauty was terrible, unearthly. They stirred and rose, their lips curling into smiles of hunger. "Come, my handsome one whispered, her voice like a seductive hiss. I could not move. My strength was gone. They pressed close, their breath hot upon my skin, their eyes gleaming red. One bent low, her lips brushing my throat, and I felt the sharpness of her teeth. Suddenly, a thunderous voice roared through the room. Count Dracula himself was upon us. With blazing eyes, he struck them back. "This man belongs to me," he cried. "You may not touch him." The women shrank into the shadows, hissing like serpents. From that night forward, I knew my fate. The Count meant to keep me there, to drain me of strength as he pleased. Yet I soon learned his plans went further. Boxes of earth, filled with the soil of his homeland, were being prepared for transport. I glimpsed wagons in the courtyard, loading coffins bound for England. My horror was complete. This being, this monster, intended to cross the sea and walk among my countrymen. And I, Jonathan Harker, was his prisoner, powerless to stop him. I made one last desperate attempt for freedom. My journal ends in confusion, for I remember little. Only a plunge from the window, the cold rushing wind, the blackness that swallowed me whole. Meanwhile, far from those dark mountains, in the quiet town of Whitby on the English coast, 2 young women wrote letters to one another. Mina Murray, my fiancée, and her dear friend Lucy Westenra. Mina worried for me, for I had written little since leaving London. She comforted herself by staying with Lucy, who was in high spirits, courted by 3 suitors at once. Arthur Holmwood, earnest and noble, with a steady gaze and a heart full of quiet devotion, who soon won her heart through his unwavering kindness. Dr. John Seward, director of a nearby asylum, a man of science and discipline, whose sharp mind questioned everything, often saying, "We must rely on facts, not fancy," even as his affections burned deeply. And Quincy Morris, a bold American with a heart as big as the West, his drawl laced with bravado as he declared, "Miss Lucy, I'd rope the moon for you if it'd make you smile," his pistol always at his side, ready for any adventure. Lucy, kind and gentle, could not bear to wound the others, though her affections lay with Arthur. She accepted his proposal, and all rejoiced, Arthur with quiet joy, Seward masking his disappointment with a forced smile, and Quincy clapping Arthur on the back, saying, "Well, partner, you're won fair and square. But if you ever need a hand, I'm your man." Yet soon after, she fell ill. At first it was only sleepwalking. Mina would wake at night to find Lucy standing at the window or drifting down the garden path in her nightgown, her eyes open but unseeing. Mina would lead her back to bed, thinking it no more than a nervous habit, but then Lucy grew pale. Her lips lost their color, her body weakened, and 2 small wounds appeared upon her throat. Dr. Seward, bewildered by the symptoms that defied his medical logic, called for help from his old mentor, Professor Abraham Van Helsing, a Dutchman of great learning. When Van Helsing arrived, he studied Lucy with grave attention. He ordered blood transfusions, first from Arthur, who gave willingly, his voice steady as he said, "For Lucy, I'd give my last drop." Then from Seward, who monitored the procedure with scientific precision. Even from Quincy himself, who rolled up his sleeve with a grin, declaring, "This here Texas blood will perk her right up." Each time Lucy revived for a while, her cheeks flushing with life. But always, by the following night, she declined again. Van Helsing grew secretive. He placed garlands of garlic about her room, hung crucifixes over her bed, and forbade that her windows be opened. Arthur and the others thought him eccentric, but they obeyed for Lucy's sake. Seward, ever the skeptic, pressed him. "Professor, why garlic?" "It's an old wives' tale," Van Helsing replied solemnly. "These are ancient rituals, my friend. Garlic repels unholy forces by its purity of earth. The crucifix disrupts them with divine light. Science alone cannot explain all shadows." Still, the attacks continued. Each morning she seemed weaker, her throat marked anew. Mina, watching her friend fade, could not understand. Meanwhile, strange reports filled the town. A great ship had come ashore in the harbor during a storm, its crew missing, its captain dead at the wheel. Only a large dog was seen leaping from the deck, running into the night. In the hold, boxes of earth lay stacked in silence. And so, while Mina prayed for Jonathan's safe return, Lucy drifted ever closer to death, her life drained by an unseen power. Despite Van Helsing's efforts, Lucy's strength ebbed like water draining from a vessel. One night, Arthur kept vigil at her side. Her breath came shallow, her skin ghostly pale. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with a strange, unnatural light. She stretched her arms toward him, whispering words that were both tender and strange. "Arthur, my love, kiss me." He bent close, longing to comfort her, but Van Helsing seized him back with sudden force. "Not for your life," the professor cried. "Do not touch her lips." "Not now," Arthur recoiled, horrified by the look upon her face. Her mouth curved in a smile too cruel, too hungry to be Lucy's own. A moment later, her body convulsed, her head fell back upon the pillow, and with a final breath, Lucy Westenra was gone. Arthur wept beside her still form, his noble resolve cracking as tears streamed down his face. Quincy turned away, his fists clenched, muttering, "Damn whatever did this. I'll hunt it to hell and back." Dr. Seward stood stunned, unable to reconcile the woman he loved with the strange creature she had become in her final moments, his scientific mind reeling. They buried her in the Westenra family tomb, sealing her in with stone and prayers. Arthur believed she was at peace. But Van Helsing's face remained grave. He said nothing to comfort them, for he knew the truth. Soon afterward, whispers filled the town. Children went missing at night, only to be found wandering later, dazed and pale, with small wounds upon their throats. They spoke of a beautiful lady who had called them from the shadows, who kissed them with sharp lips before vanishing into the dark. Van Helsing told Seward the truth. Lucy was no longer Lucy. She had risen from her grave, a vampire, a creature of the night. At first, Seward resisted, calling it madness. "Professor, this defies all reason. Vampires are myths." But Van Helsing took him to the tomb one evening. There, in her coffin, lay Lucy, cheeks flushed with color, lips red with fresh blood, her beauty terrible and inhuman. This was not the still repose of death, but something unholy. Seward's reason could deny it no longer. Together, they resolved to show Arthur. When he arrived, Van Helsing opened the tomb and revealed Lucy as she truly was. At that very moment, she stirred and rose, her eyes gleaming, her lips curling in a smile of mockery. "Arthur, come to me." she whispered sweetly, her voice a twisted echo of the gentle Lucy they knew. "My arms are hungry for you. Come, and we shall be together." Arthur staggered back, torn between horror and longing, his voice breaking. "Lucy, no, this isn't you." Van Helsing thrust a crucifix between them. Lucy recoiled with a hiss, her face contorting, her beauty twisting into a mask of rage. With a shriek, she fled back into the darkness of the tomb. Van Helsing spoke solemnly. To save her soul, she must be set free. It falls to you, Arthur. She loved you in life. Now you must release her in death. Arthur's face was white with anguish, but his hand was steady. Together they returned the next night, bringing hammer and stake. Lucy lay once more in her coffin, her expression serene as though mocking their resolve. Arthur raised the stake. For one moment he faltered, whispering, "Forgive me, my love." Then with a cry he drove it down through her heart. Lucy's body convulsed, her eyes opened wide in a final flash of terror, then softened. The terrible mask melted away, leaving only the face of the woman they had loved, gentle, at peace, finally freed. Arthur collapsed, weeping, while Van Helsing laid a hand upon his shoulder. "She is saved. You have given her back her soul." Thus ended the tragedy of Lucy Westenra. But in her destruction, the men were united. They had glimpsed the truth of the evil that had come to their shores. The Count was no legend, no shadow, but a creature of flesh and blood, whose hunger would not rest until all they loved was destroyed. Even as they mourned Lucy, events moved swiftly. For Jonathan Harker had returned at last, pale and weary from his ordeal, but alive. He told them all he had seen in Castle Dracula, the Count's nocturnal wanderings, the 3 vampire women, the boxes of earth shipped to England. The pieces came together. Dracula had crossed the sea and taken up residence in Carfax Abbey near Dr. Seward's asylum. From there he moved unseen, feeding by night, retreating by day to his coffins filled with Transylvanian soil. The group vowed to destroy him. They began searching for his boxes, consecrating each one with holy wafers so he could no longer use them as refuge. Seward led the methodical searches, his scientific approach mapping out the locations. Arthur provided resources with his noble connections, and Quincy scouted ahead, his bold spirit unflinching in the face of danger. Meanwhile, within Seward's asylum, a patient named Renfield grew increasingly violent. He spoke of his master, who promised him life everlasting. He devoured flies and spiders, even birds, as though each small life might feed his own. Van Helsing saw the signs and knew who the master was, and then the shadow fell upon Mina. Jonathan had married her as soon as he returned, grateful beyond words for her love and devotion, but their happiness was brief. Mina began to fade, growing pale, restless, her eyes shadowed by a strange weariness. At night, she would wake trembling, her lips bloodless, her throat marked by small wounds she could not explain. The men kept watch one evening and saw what she herself could not. In her chamber, as the candle burned low, a tall figure loomed over her, his head bent and his mouth pressed to her neck. Mina's eyes fluttered in helpless trance, her lips parting in a faint sigh. With a roar, the men burst into the room. The Count turned, his eyes blazing scarlet, his lips wet with blood. "Fools," he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "She is mine now, bound to me forever. England will fall, and she shall rule at my side." With superhuman strength, he hurled them aside and with mocking laughter vanished into the night. They rushed to Mina's side. She was trembling, weak, and her lips were stained with blood, not her own, but his, for Dracula had forced her to drink from him. By that act, he had bound her to him, body and soul. Jonathan nearly collapsed with grief. Mina clung to him, whispering, "Do not weep for me, my love. We must be strong. Use what has been done to me, if it can help destroy him." Van Helsing explained that Mina was now linked to the Count. She could sense his movements, his thoughts, his very will. It was a curse, but also, perhaps, their only weapon. With dread resolve, they swore to hunt him down. They sought his remaining boxes of earth, breaking his sanctuary, forcing him to flee from place to place. Each night, Mina grew weaker, the bond dragging her nearer to death. Then came the worst blow. Renfield, who had long worshipped Dracula, suddenly tried to resist him. He begged the men to protect Mina, confessing that the master sought to claim her completely. But when Dracula discovered his betrayal, he descended upon Renfield in fury, leaving him broken and dying on the asylum floor. With his last breath, Renfield whispered what he had seen. The Count had visited Mina, and she was lost. Racing upstairs, the men found the chamber dark, the air heavy with dread. Dracula stood over Mina once again, his hand gripping her throat, his red eyes blazing triumph. Jonathan hurled himself forward, but the Count vanished before he could strike. Mina lay pale as death. Yet still she breathed. She had not been taken entirely. Hope remained. But the truth was clear. Dracula could not be destroyed in England. Too many sanctuaries remained to him, too many shadows to hide in. Their only chance was to pursue him to his homeland, to the dark mountains of Transylvania, and end him where he had begun. And so the hunt was set. From that moment forward, the Count was a hunted creature. Van Helsing led us with fierce determination, and together we scoured London to track down every box of earth he had brought from Transylvania. Each coffin was more than just soil. It was a sanctuary, a resting place where the Count could recover his strength. We found them hidden in old chapels, crypts, and abandoned houses. In each one, we opened the lid, scattered holy wafers within, and sealed it against him. One by one, his sanctuaries fell. Seward documented each discovery with precise notes. Arthur rallied the group with his unyielding spirit, and Quincy charged into the darkest corners, his knife drawn, declaring, "If that varmint's hiding here, I'll flush him out like a coyote." Yet for every victory, Mina weakened. The bond between her and the Count drew tighter. At times, she seemed to hear his thoughts, to feel his presence. By day, she would write what she had sensed. The sound of waves crashing on a shore, the feeling of earth beneath a coffin lid, the roar of horses across a plain. Through her, we glimpsed his movements, as though his mind was tethered to hers. The knowledge tormented her, but she bore it with quiet courage. "Use me," she told us. "If I must endure this curse, let it serve a purpose." Her words steeled our resolve. Renfield's death had shaken us, but it also revealed the truth of the Count's power. He had crushed the poor man like an insect, his strength beyond anything human. If we failed, Mina would become as Lucy had, condemned to walk in darkness for eternity. None of us could allow that fate. Then one night, returning to the asylum after consecrating another coffin, we found a terrible sight. Mina had been attacked once more. The Count had forced his way into her chamber, leaving her half-conscious, her skin drained, her lips bloodied. Jonathan nearly collapsed at the sight of her, swearing he would tear Dracula apart with his bare hands. We knew then that our time was almost gone. The Count had few resting places left. He was cornered, desperate, and he fled. A ship was sighted leaving England under strange circumstances, bound eastward. The Demeter had carried him before. Now another vessel carried him back across the sea. His destination was clear, his castle in Transylvania, where his strength would be renewed, where he would be invincible once more. The decision was swift. We would follow. We divided our efforts, some by sea, some by land, racing ahead to intercept him. Mina, bound to him, served as our unwilling compass. Through her visions, we learned his path. At times, she would cry out in anguish, describing landscapes she had never seen, yet which Van Helsing recognized from maps and memory. In one pivotal moment, as the group debated routes, Mina defied the growing haze in her mind, declaring firmly, "He heads for the Borgo Pass. I see it clearly. We must cut him off there before he reaches the castle." The chase grew frantic. Across stormy waters, through railways and rugged countryside, we pressed on, knowing each day brought him closer to safety. And Mina, she began to fade. Her skin grew translucent, her eyes hollow, her will drained by his shadow. Yet still she bore it with a strength none of us could comprehend. She wrote in her journal, urging us not to despair, reminding us of Lucy, reminding us of the innocent lives that would fall if we faltered. Even as weakness gripped her, she rallied the group, whispering strategies drawn from her cursed insights, her intelligence shining through the darkness. We traveled with fire in our hearts. This was no longer only about revenge, but about salvation. For Mina, for ourselves, for all. The final confrontation lay ahead in the mountains of the Count's birth, the Borgo Pass. Snow swirled around us in violent gusts, the mountains rising like white phantoms. The air was bitterly cold, the sky dark with storm. Somewhere ahead, the Count's carriage thundered toward his castle, guarded by a band of gypsies loyal to him. Within, hidden in one of his remaining coffins, he sought to reach his fortress before the sun could fall. We split into two groups, riding hard to cut him off. Arthur and Quincy pressed forward with rifles ready, Arthur's voice steady as he commanded, "Stay together, we end this today." Jonathan and I took another path, blades in hand. Van Helsing remained behind with Mina, both to protect her and to keep her from the Count's influence at the crucial hour. The chase was fierce. The gypsies whipped their horses, shouting curses, their blades flashing in the snow. We clashed in a storm of steel and powder. Quincy fired into their midst, driving them back with a whoop. "Yeehaw! That's for Lucy, you varmints." But a blade struck him deep. Blood soaked his coat, yet he fought on with wild courage. The carriage jolted to a halt. Jonathan and I reached it first. With a cry, Jonathan leapt onto the coffin, tearing it open. There lay the Count, his eyes closed, his lips curled in a faint smile, already regaining his strength in the soil of his homeland. Jonathan raised his knife, his hand trembling not with fear, but with fury. He drove it down, slashing across the Count's throat. At the same instant, Quincy, though mortally wounded, plunged his Bowie knife deep into the vampire's heart. A terrible cry burst from the Count's lips. His eyes opened wide with a look of shock, of rage, and then of release. His body crumbled into dust before our eyes, swept away upon the storm. The silence that followed was vast. Mina gasped, clutching her throat as though freed from an unseen chain. The mark upon her skin faded. Her eyes, once shadowed, shone clear. She was saved. In that moment, her defiance had guided us true, her active will breaking the bond at last. But our joy was cut with grief. Quincy staggered, his strength gone. We gathered round him, Arthur and Jonathan lifting him in their arms. With his last breath, he smiled, whispering that he was glad to die knowing Mina was free, that Lucy was avenged, that the evil had been ended. Then he was still. We buried him there among the mountains, the storm passing into quiet, the sun breaking through the clouds. Count Dracula was gone. 7 years have passed since that terrible journey into the mountains of Transylvania. Jonathan and I live in peace now, blessed with a son whom we named after our fallen friend, Quincy. His laughter fills our home, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and life endure. Arthur and Dr. Seward remain close, bound to us by bonds forged in blood and sorrow. Arthur with his enduring nobility, Seward with his blend of science and hard-won faith. As for Professor Van Helsing, his wisdom still guides us, though his eyes carry a weight that never leaves him. Often I think back to that winter night, to the moment when the Count was destroyed. There was no blaze of glory, no thunder from the heavens, only dust scattered upon the wind, silence falling over the snow. Yet in that silence lay a triumph greater than any victory I could name. And still, sometimes in the long hours before dawn, I wake and wonder, did we truly end him? Can such ancient evil ever die completely? The name remains, whispered in nightmares, carried in stories told by firelight. Dracula, a shadow that lingers, a reminder of what waits beyond the veil of night.